Hi, Sammy, can you hear me? Brent here.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, it's okay.
Awesome. Great. Okay, Sammy, are you recording then?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right, good. Then I don't need to remember to do it. Great. All right, Sammy, should we get started?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, great. All right, so let me try and share my screen and make sure everything works here. Share this. Okay. Oops. Let me just. Okay, so I'm trying to share my keynote. Can you see my keynote?
Yes.
Perfect.
It's great.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, I just want to try and shrink this Zoom bar here, but my cursor's not showing up. Just a second. Okay, there we go. All right. So let me go back. Okay, so let me start now. Welcome to the session about content migration with Python. I'm going to be showing some techniques and tools I've been using to analyze match some of the old content and popular content, and then post it to WordPress. So trying to get from an old CMS to a new CMS. A little bit first about my background. My name is Brent Deverman. I'm a product manager and entrepreneur. Previously, I've worked for Duty Free Shopping, HSBC, and CNN, doing a lot of web and content migration. In HSBC, we migrated the old website to the new website for Hong Kong and new platform. And a lot of what I'm doing now, though, in this talk is related to a business I have called ShenzhenParty.com, which has been serving people living in Shenzhen and traveling to Shenzhen for since 2001. The CMS is quite out of date and the site is out of date. So I'm replatforming and trying to take the popular content off. So if you have any questions about this, my contact information is here. And I'll get into the nitty-gritty now. Okay, so my goal here that I've been trying to do it with Python is to take all the most popular posts from my old site that I got from Google Analytics, and I put it into Google Sheets, and then I want to match that content and those posts IDs and URLs from the old CMS, and then start to create a script to create new, take that content and create new content in WordPress. And I'm kind of, it's 5,000 pages that I have in this Google Sheet. And so I want to use this Google Sheet as like the dashboard to understand what's going to be mapped where and what progress it's in, and if it's ready to be published and all those kind of things. So this is kind of like a dashboard, and I want to use Python to help update this. So some of the Python libraries and WordPress plugins I've been using are listed here. For doing a lot of the REST, it's the requests library and the JSON library. For talking to Google Sheets, I chose a library called gspread. And with that, you have to use OAuth to authenticate, so you can see the OAuth to client. And then some of the utility libraries I've been using is the datetime to translate dates from one CMS to another, the CSV library, and a lot of debugging with ppprint, as well as the base64 library. The base64 library is important for using with the application passwords plugin. So this application passwords plugin is what allows me to post to the REST API securely. Okay, so kind of the first step I've done is to retrieve the data about the published posts from the old CMS. Okay, and so what I did here is some example code for retrieving data from the WordPress JSON API. In my CMS, I had to loop through all the posts, and then loop through to get a list of all the posts, and then I had to loop again to get the actual details of the post, like URL, path, and stuff of the post. And at that time, I also was filtering out some posts that didn't need to be migrated and stuff that I knew the data type didn't exist on WordPress. And so this was kind of a first filter. And so what I did here as an example is I'm using the WordPress post API here, and I'm looping through and getting a list of posts from the API. It gives me one page of posts at a time, maybe 10 or 20 posts. And I'm gonna just loop through this and request from WordPress the posts, 10 or 20 posts at a time, loop through those 10 or 20 posts, and I'm going to write out each post to a CSV to capture, some of the essential information like the link, the post ID, type of post, and title. So that was kind of the first thing I did. So being able to do this through the JSON API, we imported the JSON library and the request library and the CSV library, and made the request to WordPress, and then wrote it out in CSV format. Okay, so I got some of that data there. And now I want to start to do some comparisons with my Google Sheets. So one of the first tricky things to set up with Google Sheets is you got to give API access for that Google Sheet to your application, your script. And so, as I said, I was using gspread, and you can go to the Google Sheets API and you can enable the Google Sheets API. And I think I had to do this for Google Sheets and Google Drive, I believe. In the end, what you end up doing is you download a credentials.json file, and you can put that, in the same directory as your Python script or whatever. This is what's going to allow you to get to your Google Sheets data. Okay, and so now here I want to do some matching with my Google Sheets data. And so this is an example that shows how to read the Google Sheet and update the Google Sheet. So I'll walk you through this code. The first is a utility function so that we can look up a value in a list and not have an error if the value does not exist. So we'll be calling that later in the for loop. Okay, then I'm importing the gspread Python library and the OAuth library to be able to connect to it. And of course, you can also maybe use JSON, datetime, and CSV as you open up the script and do more. Okay. So the first thing is you have to give the credentials a scope of what it should have access to. So you'll see there it's the spreadsheets, feeds, and Google Drive. Then as we imported this service account credentials class, then I'm going to use a function to get the key from the JSON file, so I don't have to have it in my Python script. And so give it the path to the file and the scope, and then you have a credentials variable, which you then pass over to the gspread to authorize for that document. And you return store that authorization in the client variable, and then you can then open the spreadsheet. So using client open, I give the worksheet name, and I get access to the spreadsheet. I take sheet 1, which is the first sheet I have, and I store that in work_sheet. And now if you want to get access to additional worksheets that are in the Google Doc, then you use this technique on the right side. So I have the SP variable, which I stored my document reference in, and then I call the worksheet function with the name of the additional worksheet, and I can store it into what I call the reject sheet. So these are, so now what we're gonna do is kind of try to find, we exported all the posts. We want to check in the Google Sheet, do they exist in the top 5,000 popular articles? And the ones that exist we'll store in one variable I've called combined, and the ones that don't, I'll store it in another variable called rejected. Okay, and then I can take these and later update the sheet. So open up my CSV file that I wrote up before and start to read through it. Okay, and just loop through each line in the file within a row and use my index function that I created earlier to check if the fragment of the URL is there. Oh, and I forgot one line, the line second from the top of setting the URL frag variable. What I'm doing there is I have the worksheet, which is the first worksheet in the Google Sheet, and I will call the function col_values with a parameter of 1. Parameter of 1 means column 1. Okay, so in that Google Sheet, I have the URL fragment there, the URI. And so I can see if my CSV has that URI and if there's a match, okay? And so as you see in the for loop, I'm then separating out the ones that are in the top 5,000 and the ones that are not, okay? And then, you know, once I have that separated out, then I could, you know, say write it back to that Google Sheet, the proposed delete Google Sheet. And here, an example of doing an actual update to the Google Sheet is the last line here. So you could say reject_sheet update, and then that's you're gonna specify a cell, and you're gonna specify the contents of the cell. So this command there would update the sheet, and you could do that for a whole list of data as well. So that's how you get data from the Google Sheet and then update the Google Sheet. Okay, then you know we've updated the Google Sheet, and we you know have our dashboard, and we've kind of processed a lot of the data, and then now we want to start creating posts in WordPress. Okay, so here is kind of the steps to do that. And you know, first you have the application password plugin that you have to activate in WordPress, and what that does is then gives you like dedicated application passwords that you can create to use with the REST API. Then these passwords, you go onto your profile and you create a new password, and then you copy it. It'll give you kind of unique password you can copy, and you also need your username as well from your profile page, and then you can use those two things to authenticate. Okay, so here's a sample way to create a post in WordPress. Using the JSON library, the request library, and then, as I mentioned, the base64 library. First line here of post item, we're going to create a dictionary of the content we want for the post. And so, you know, I have things for that WordPress understands, like the status of the post. I'm making it draft because I don't want it to be published till my staff has reviewed it. And you can see that I can have a slug here, you know, which the example here is automated, but, you know, I could use the URIs from my post on the other CMS, so I can try to preserve the SEO. And you can see there's the content and the author. It's a little bit hard to see here, but because it's going over the screenshot, but one key thing is the author has to be the user ID of that you want to associate that post with. So you'll have to look that up in WordPress, and it's a little bit tricky to find, and it's not in the interface. You might have to look in the URL in the back end. Okay, so we built the post, and we have then the application password. So you're gonna put your application password that you created there, and then you have a username, and you know I just used the example admin there, but you should change that username. And then here's the little tricky part that I found with the base64 encoding. So you got to take the username, concatenate it with a colon, and then concatenate it with the app password. All right. Then you got to base64 encode that string. All right. But of course, it would like it to be in UTF-8. So if I take the auth head variable that I concatenated and I encode that string as UTF-8, then I pass that to the URL safe encoding base64 encode function. Store that in auth head, and then I still have to convert the base64 data type to a UTF-8 string. Okay, so store that again in auth head, and then I'm ready to build the headers of the post. And so I take I create a header called authorization, and it's basic authorization, and add that with my base64 encoded string. And then I set up my URL which is going to be to my WordPress API endpoint. Then I just call request.post, passing the URL, the post dictionary as the JSON parameter, and the headers. Okay, and I post that, and then I take out the content of the result there and store it into J. And so then what's returned is the full data of the post that was created in WordPress. So you then can get out the ID of the WordPress post, and maybe you could take that ID and store that in the Google Sheet, so you know that one post has been created, and can access it later with other scripts. This is a screenshot as an example of the post being created in WordPress. Okay, and then I'll go on to the next part. So another thing you can do is, after you've created a post, you can search by the URI on it, or what WordPress calls the post slug. And this is an example of how to do that. So maybe you didn't store the ID as I just suggested earlier. You can still find that post. And so if you want to use maybe the URL as the kind of common ID between the two systems, you can maybe do that with this as well. So as I said, like, next steps in the script are to maybe, update the Google Sheet, say with the various IDs, so you can have a proper mapping of the old ID in the old CMS with the new ID in the new CMS. And, then, maybe, you could run the migration script a couple times. If, something goes wrong, you can just update the post instead of creating a new post every time you run it. Then you can better understand what pages have been created in WordPress and what have not. And then maybe you can also be querying WordPress to get, say, the publish status. So if my staff are, reviewing those posts that were created, and then they eventually think they're okay and they publish them, then we could automatically update this Google Sheet on a regular basis by running a script. Okay, so I think almost time. Thanks for viewing. I don't know if you have any questions. You can ask now, or you can email me after I send out the deck. No questions then? Okay. Well, appreciate you guys joining, and hope that this was useful. And if you try anything, just let me know. Send me an email and I can help out as well. Thank you.